Hi folks, I'm Bradley Davis, lecturer in immersive technologies here at the University of Staffordshire.
And I'm Mike Beardwood, course leader for games design.
And welcome to Developer Mode. So today, what we're going to look at is a little bit of Unity, and I'm going to talk about encapsulation. Now, you, I'm sure, Mike, are a little bit familiar with what encapsulation is.
That putting things in capsules.
No, not quite. So we work with the idea of object-oriented programming. And in object orientation, you have this concept of something called a class, which represents a given object in a game or in any scenario, really, that you're kind of programming with. And the whole point of this is that an object can do certain things. And it should, in theory, look after itself. So there shouldn't be a point where we have a player that knows about an enemy. It shouldn't need to ever directly communicate with that enemy. So we might launch a projectile. The projectile hits the enemy. The enemy then doesn't need to know about the player that's fired the projectile, right? So we have this concept of ownership. And we're going to look at a little project here to kind of work through how do we take something that isn't set up with proper encapsulation in mind and turn it into an encapsulated, everything is sort of looking after itself and not too worried about what anything else in the scene is doing. So let's have a look, first of all, at what we're working with. So this is Unity, for those of you who are not familiar. I've got a little player that's in my scene here. He's got a few little particles on him as well. And then we've got two enemies. We've got this enemy here, which is a melee enemy. And then we've got a pink enemy over here, which is our ranged enemy. And you might just be able to make out the sort of little circle on the edge here, which is the range that the enemy is. So if I hit play, right, we are starting from a sort of working solution here. I can run around, right? We've got this sort of not very well designed level. I'm very sorry, Mike. But our two enemies, they will chase after us. We've got the ranged enemy is launching rocks, and we can shoot at them. They make a little bit of a noise when we shoot them as well. And we've got some health bars, and the character's health bar works as well. Now, we're not going to focus too much on the enemy side of things for getting this working. We're going to look at kind of fixing the problems that we have with our player at the moment. So let's dive into our code here.
Brad,
hello.
What problems do we have with the player? Because coming from, I'll put on my hat as a rapid programmer. Yeah, I say rapid programmer, not a programmer, designer. It works.
It does work.
Can't we just, this is the point, I'd just throw it at Brad and walk away. But what is wrong? Tell me the things that are wrong.
Kind of one of the main problems that's wrong at the moment is we haven't necessarily separated input from the kind of stuff that's actually happening, right? So we want to think of our player as separate to the game. So our player feeds input into the game then responds to the input in a certain way. And we should have something managing the input and something else that's responding to it, right? Sort of in that separation. At the moment, we have what you might refer to as a God class, which is where we have this top-down character controller. And in here, we've got this sort of little event here, handle attack performed, which is doing a bunch of stuff to do with kind of timing out of our weapons. So we have a little bit of a fire rate change on here. And then it's calling our fire function. Now our fire function, if I control click on this, you can see is directly below here. There's no concept of a weapon, right? The character is in itself the weapon, and that's not good, right? Because if you want a different weapon, how do you equip a different weapon?
Well, you just put more in this God class, surely.
We could put more in the God class, but that's terrible, right? We want to separate our concerns, right? Separation of concerns. And then we want to kind of map everything to work around that separation. So we're doing some nice simple stuff in this fire. We're getting a vector towards where the mouse is. We're then shooting at that mouse position based on where we are in the world. We're spawning our projectile, and then we've got a projectile to manage here. But again, why should the player care about the projectile? Depending on what weapon we have, it should fire different types of projectile, right? We're not going to go too much into that today, but we do want to look at how can we move our fire out of our character controller so that our fire is happening on a weapon, So the next thing we can do is then think about how do we have different types of weapon that sort of do different things.
So if I was holding a pistol in real life, I'm sorry, Brad, and I fired it, I do not have any control over the bullet.
No.
The gun is effectively controlling the bullet, but I am pulling the trigger on the gun. However, if I replace this with an assault rifle, that is a different thing, but I'm just still pulling the trigger. So my input is pull the trigger and see what happens, and the gun does the rest of it.
Yes,
so that's
exactly.
why I shouldn't have anything to do with a bullet in real life, just in general.
Yes, and that is what we mean by a separation of concerns between these two things. So the first thing I'm going to do is make some form of representation for our weapon. So I'm going to go into Unity here. Cool. Quick script compilation. Now, underneath our character at the moment, we have the health bar that is represented in the scene as such. And then we have the camera, right? So the camera is the thing that's kind of following our character around the scene. We're going to add a new empty game object underneath our character, and I'm going to call that weapon. Right? It's going to be based at a position of 0, 0, 0, so that all our bullets continue to fire from nothing, right? They fire from the center of our character. We won't worry too much about adding a sprite or anything like this. We'll just get it firing from the middle of the character. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new script that I'm going to also call weapon, right? So if I type weapon in here, I can enter through, and that gives me the option to save this. I'm going to save it somewhere sensible. So we have a nice scripts folder here with lots of the other scripts that are already in the project. I'm going to stick my weapon script in there, and we'll give Unity a moment to make up its mind about what it's doing.
So the interesting thing here, going on that kind of OOP line we were on about earlier on, object-oriented programming, is we could give that weapon to something else as well, couldn't we?
Yes. So the same weapon could be used by enemies as it is by the player. And we do have a little bit of something in here that might, if we get onto it, we might get the opportunity to work with that too. So first things first, I'm going to go through and have a look through my fire function in the top-down character controller and basically just rip this out of the top-down character controller and put that into my weapon. And we'll just sort of deal with the problems as they come up. So I will Control X that out of here. We won't worry about this issue for the moment. And I'm just going to pop that function in there. Because effectively what we want to do at some point is go weapon.fire, just to fire our weapon out into the world. Now we've got a few things that we need to deal with here, some of which are shouting at us for very fun and interesting reasons. So let's see if we can fix some of these. Now camera.main should be fine. Mouse.current.position.read value, that will be because we're missing a using statement at the top. So the way using statements work, for those of you who aren't familiar, effectively what that says is we want to use some of the code from somewhere else. So by default, all of our scripts that we make in Unity will say using Unity engine, and that's what means that we can get access to something called mono behavior and everything in there. But there will be other using statements for other different things. So if I scroll up to the top here, I think it's probably this using Unity engine.input system. So let's take that from there. Oh, I'm probably going to still need that in there as well. So let's copy that over and put that in there. There's our mouse problem. Excellent. Now we've got a couple of other problems to deal with. So we've got some form of projectile prefab that we need to know about, and we've got some form of projectile speed that we need to know about. Now these are variables. I can tell they're variables by the fact that they've got M underscore. Have you ever seen people do M underscore, Mike?
Underscore for a variable?
Yeah.
Does it denote what type of variable that is?
Not quite. So there's a couple of different types of kind of ways that you can prefix your variable names. M underscore is a more modern way of saying this is a member variable. So a member variable is a variable that belongs in the scope of a given class. The old-fashioned way is something called Hungarian notation, which is quite interesting, where you prefix the variable with what type it is, right? So let's say that our projectile speed here was a float. It's probably going to be a float. We would say S projectile speed. But now we can highlight over these things and it tells us what they are. So if we highlight over this transform, it says, hey, look, this is a transform. So we don't need to really do Hungarian notation anymore.
Okay.
There you go. So let's have a look in our little variables section and see if we can find our various bits and bobs here. So we've got our projectile prefab. We've got a damage in here as well, which Ooh, that's not very good either. And then we've got some stuff about fire rate. Now, our player is firing the weapon. We could move the fire rate over there as well. But one of the things that I kind of want to do here is go from working thing to working thing, and then kind of move more bits over as we go. So we will take the speed, and we will take the prefab over into our weapon to start off with. And I'm going to take this little header as well so that it looks nice and lovely in Unity. And as with all of our variables, we will pop them at the top of the file. So let's take that one over, and let's take our projectile speed over as well. Pop those in there. And that should clear up our other two errors from here. Now we're going to get rid of start and update. So do you know what start and update do, Mike?
I imagine it's code that runs on start when it begins its play.
Yes.
If you were doing Unreal, we begin play, and update on tick, I suppose, if that was Unreal. So every single frame.
Exactly. So we've effectively got begin play and tick here for those of you more familiar with Unreal. So let's get rid of those. Let's get our weapon script all saved up. Now we need access to this in our top-down character controller. We effectively need a way to say, this is the weapon that we currently have, so that we can access this fire function. So where we had our projectile stuff before, I'm actually going to quickly copy this header back over. And instead of saying projectile parameters, we're going to say weapon parameters. And that allows us to sort of nicely see what's going on with our current projectile stuff that we haven't moved. But then also we can start to think about, well, this is going to be our weapon, right? So we need access to the weapon as well. So we will declare a serialized field. It's not going to be a private float. It's going to be a private weapon, right? So because we've created that weapon class, we now have access to it. I'm going to call it m_current weapon, because we might have a list of other weapons. Why is it just put this up here? Don't know why it's done that. Let's put that back down there. And then because we've used serialized field here, we can go and assign that weapon in the Unity editor. Now, when we come to actually fire our weapon, if we scroll all the way through here, this is the last error that we have to deal with, right? We've got our fire function. And now, instead of just calling fire, we want to do m_current weapon dot fire. Now, I believe this is going to get angry at me. It says cannot access private method fire here. Now, when we were working with everything in our kind of God class, everything was a private function. We didn't need access to it outside of the given class. Now that we've moved it over to weapon, we need this function to be public. So I will see if I can remember to do that as we move everything else across. Right. So fingers crossed, that should be all the code that we need to do to actually move our fire function over. Let's go back to the Unity editor and start setting this up. Compiled, done, lovely. So previously in our character, we had a few bits here about the projectile. Now we have our current weapon. So all I'm going to do is click and drag our weapon from here over here. That's going to grab the weapon script that is attached to this weapon game object. Then we need to set up our weapon. So we need to decide on a speed. Now I cannot remember the speed that we had before. 20. Let's go for 20. That sounds reasonable. In fact, tell you what we can do. We can have a look at our pink enemy, which is our ranged enemy, and see how quickly its projectiles are firing to give us some clue. Doesn't say. Excellent. Let's hop into the code and see if we can quickly find it in there. It's a projectile. Yeah, it does some stuff. It does some things. It says yeet whenever we fire a bullet. That's good fun, isn't it?
Okay. Thank you for commenting that, bro.
It adds a force in a direction at an impulse, and that direction is... doesn't say. Excellent. So we will go with the 20 and we'll work it out from there.
Then we're fine.
Now, the other thing that we need is our actual projectile itself, right? We need to assign some prefab in here. So if I go to projectiles, we have a player projectile that we had set up before. I can then click and drag our player projectile in here. Now, fingers crossed, This all works with no errors. I haven't tested this, so we will find out.
Run it live.
Here we go. So I can still run around. That's all good. We can shoot. That's a very, very speedy projectile.
Sorry.
But that's okay. We can tweak that a little bit. It's still doing damage. They're still going oof. Oh, no, reloading. I don't have anything to show the reload, unfortunately, but there we are. So that's all working as is. But now we have a weapon that we as a character are saying, effectively, pull the trigger, fire the weapon. And then the weapon just goes, okay,
cool. Could we make another weapon and then change the speed of it?
We could make another weapon, but I want to finish moving everything else over first.
That's what I do.
So let's have a look at what else we have in here. So we've got our weapon with a fire. Now, really, right, our kind of weapon reloading and timeout, that also should be managed by the weapon.
Yes.
Right? Because if it's not being managed by the weapon, that's a bad time. So let's see if we can sneakily figure out exactly how to do this. I think this should just copy over. I think it will. So let's copy this over. We need a few more variables though this time, because we've got all of these sort of bullets in the clip and fire timeouts and the clip size. So let's see if we can move all of that over relatively easily. So first things first, we want to move over this. Now, have you ever seen an if statement written like this?
I mean, I use a lot of Unreal. So, no.
So this here is something that we call a guard clause. Now, what we could do is invert this. So if we could say, if the time is greater than or equal to the timeout, we want to run all of this code, right? And this is the way that most people would think about if statements. If a certain thing is true, do a bunch of stuff. The problem is that this starts to look messy. So let's say that you have a lot of things to check. So here we've just got a particular timeout. Let's say that we also wanted to check, first of all, how many bullets are in the clip before we attempt to fire. And then maybe we want to check, I don't know, how many barrels the weapon has to see how many bullets we need to shoot. By the time we do this, we're going to be indented halfway across the screen and it's going to get difficult to read.
Are you saying nested if?
Yes, we would have lots of nested if statements. So what a guard clause does is it kind of inverts that process. It does the check in reverse, right? So if the time is less than the fire timeout, i.e. we're not at a point where we can shoot just yet, let's just get out of here. Let's just leave, right? Saves us doing a whole bunch of maths we don't need to do just yet. So we'll take our guard clause over and all of our stuff that is managing sort of our fire rate here. Let's also whack that into our fire function. And maybe we should tidy this up a bit. Maybe this should have its own function as well, but we'll deal with that in a little bit. Then we want to do our fire, right? So this is the bit that is representative of the code that we already have. We'll cut that bottom stuff out as well and pop that in down the bottom. So we've effectively kept the same order here, right? This bit here is the stuff that was previously in our fire function. And then we've got kind of the bits around that manage our timeout.
So basically at the top, we are just asking, has the timer expired for our refire? If it has, then fire the stuff, which is the highlighted stuff.
Yep.
Then minus C number of clips.
Yeah.
And reload if need to.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do actually here is I'm just going to create another quick private function. Let's call it spawn and shoot. And we will take this stuff out of here, move that down into spawn and shoot. Oh, I need to give that a void. Whoopsie.
That could be kind of useful if you were using like a shotgun and you went, you know what, I'm going to shoot this 4 times.
Yeah.
Instead of once. So we're already adding effectively more potential functionality for later on by separating out all these concerns.
Yes. So now we have some more variables that we need to go and steal. So we've got a fire timeout, fire rate, number of bullets in the clip, and the clip size. So let's go and find those. Let's just tidy that up while we're here. Scroll all the way up. So here we go. We've got fire rate, clip size, number of bullets in the clip, and the fire time. Look at that. They're all below those weapon parameters that we had before. It's almost as if this was vaguely laid out sensibly. Sort of. So let's take that over here and let's put those below here. and then let's work out what is what here. So these few things at the top are still our parameters about the projectile, and then everything below is information about the weapon. So its fire rate, its clip size, the number of bullets left, and the timeout. So I will take another header down here, and we will call this weapon parameters, right? I guess we already have a weapon parameters. Maybe I should call it something else, but I can't think of another name at this moment in time. Now, one of the other things that we can do to make sure that we're setting all these values up properly is that we should go and check our top-down character controller to see where those were used. We don't need that anymore. So let's see if we can find, here we go, look. So by using the errors that are in the file from as we've moved things across, we can start to see what we need to do. So we have something going on in start here, which is setting the number of bullets in the clip to whatever size the clip is. Now this is done so that we don't need to sort of do this in 2 or 3 different places, right? How many games have you played where if you have a weapon at the start of the game, you don't necessarily start with a full magazine of bullets? There are some sort of survival-y games.
Yeah,
I guess.
You like have 2 rounds.
Yeah.
It's like long.
But generally speaking, let's be nice to our player. Let's make sure that they start with a full load of bullets. So we'll put that in there. Is there anything else here that we need to fix up? No, see no reds. Cool. So again, let's make sure this works before we start playing around with too much stuff. And the behavior that we have should be exactly the same. Before I start waffling about why it's the same, what's different. Let's make sure that everything is set. Yeah, we've got a fire rate of 0, clip size of 8. Seems fine to me. So we've got our character. We can fire away as fast as we like, and then our 8 bullets have been fired. So I'm clicking away here, and we're not shooting yet. There we go. Excellent. So still working. But now what we've done, if we have a look now at our top-down character controller, on attack performed, which in this case is just mapped to my left click, we're saying fire the current weapon. There's nothing else here, right? This is now purely handling the inputs that have been sent through from whatever buttons we're pressing and telling the weapon, fire. So let's make sure that's all saved up. Now, we should really do the same for the projectile.
We should, because I could have a different rounds. So I could put higher caliber rounds in if I was a crazy person, or explosive rounds, or fish rounds. Don't know. You could have a shotgun that fires fish.
Is this like the opposite of fish in a barrel?
Yes.
I see.
Fish out of a barrel.
Okay, so let's start thinking then about how this sort of works. So there's a couple of things that we want to think about in this. What should the weapon manage, and what should our projectile manage? So we've already got these kind of 2 bits of parameters about a given projectile. So it might be that we've got different speeds or something like this. So we can already start to see what should be going in a projectile script and what should be going in our weapon script. So our weapon still needs to know what projectile it's firing. It still needs this prefab here. But a weapon shouldn't be managing, oh, whoopsie daisy. I've hit some buttons on the side of this wonderful mouse. Our weapon, should not be managing the speed of the projectile, nor should it really be managing how much damage that projectile is doing, right? It might pass some multipliers down to the projectile, maybe, right? If we think of a game like Borderlands or something, where we've got all of these kind of weird and funky parameters on our guns. But on the whole, the weapon should not really tell the projectile to do anything other than go over there. So let's take our player projectile here. And we already have a player projectile script that has some damage on it. Look at that. So maybe I should start figuring out how some of this works. So let's have a little bit of a look at how our projectile script works at the moment. So we've got this thing, which is kind of managing our collisions. So we're saying if we collide with a player, and because this is the player projectile, we're just going to go nah, we didn't actually collide with the player. We're not going to process that collision. We're also going to ignore collisions with other trigger colliders. So this is like an overlap box.
Yep.
So if we have another overlap box that we hit, we're going to ignore that. The reason we're doing that is because if you remember our ranged enemy from earlier, this circle here is secretly just an overlap box, right? So we don't want to collide with that. We want to collide with the actual hitbox of the enemy as well. And then we're saying, let's handle the collision with our enemies and do a few bits and bobs here. So what do we think's missing from this, Mike?
There's no red. We like red.
There's no red. That's pretty good. The other thing that we notice here is that this is not inheriting from mono behavior.
Dun, dun.
So I've already done a few little sort of sane and sensible fixes to this that I didn't realize I'd done, but there we are, to make sure that all of our projectiles, so player projectile and our enemy projectile, presumably, if I can quickly open that script, both inherit from this projectile class. So we've got some underlying behavior that is already encapsulated inside that projectile, and then both of the enemy and player projectiles are just acting with different collisions is sort of what's going on here.
So effectively, your enemy projectile seeks the player or only overlaps with the player.
Yes.
And then your player projectile only interacts with the enemies.
Exactly. There we go. And you can see here that we have the damage in our kind of overarching class. So we've already done a little bit of encapsulation and management as to what various things are going to do in various places. So let's fix up a few bits of this. We should really be using serialized field here. So let's do that. And you could argue that damage should be a float.
I mean, that's a big argument.
I think
it's a big argument. You could go anywhere with this. Older games, generally it's an int because you only have like 5 hearts of damage. But newer games, maybe not. Maybe you have 100.3. My question is, what is 0.5 health?
I don't know. But I think if you're doing things like multipliers, it makes sense to have it as a float and then maybe round it up or down or something like this. Now that has caused some problems, so let's see if we can fix that. Our health components work off it being an integer. So let's not worry too much about that for now. Let's keep that as an integer and deal with that problem a little bit later. So we can start thinking then about some of our projectile parameters. Now you could make an argument that our projectile should also know which direction it's going in. What do you think?
I don't know. Is it a smart bullet? If it needed to home onto a target,
maybe.
If it's a dumb bullet, it probably doesn't.
Maybe that's what we could do. Maybe we could make a smart bullet. No, that's too complicated. We won't do that. So what we will do then is we will have a look at how we can sort of initialize this value or change this value, if you will, through the concept of something called an initialization chain. So now that we're working with this concept of something owns something else, we have a weapon that is firing a projectile. It's sort of in charge of spawning that projectile, sending it out into the world. There might be some values that we want to pass through to kind of initialize this projectile in a certain way. So we've already talked about weapons maybe having multipliers or something like this. It may be the case that we want to pass through a certain damage multiplier or a certain effect, shall we say, right? So let's do or kind of set up that initialization chain. So to do this, we're going to create a new public function called init, or initialize, if you will. I'm going to go for init because, as I'm sure programmers out there will sympathize, I don't like this keyboard, and that's sort of okay. And we will initialize with something, right? So for now, what I'm going to say is that our initialize function is going to pass through just a damage value. So I know I've just said our weapon shouldn't control the damage, but just to kind of prove a point, we're just going to pass some damage through. So our default damage is 10. Let's maybe say damage, and we'll say m_damage is equal to damage. And we'll just initialize it with a given damage amount. So then down here, when we spawn our projectile in our weapon, instead of, we could just do that. Okay, let's do it this way. So we want to get that projectile component that is on the kind of projectile that we've spawned. So we've got a component called projectile that is a script that is attached to the projectile game object. I should stop saying the word projectile. It's getting sort of challenging. Challenging. So we can go and get our projectile. So from our spawned projectile, we will get that projectile component. And then just as we have done sort of down here with the rigid body, we can say if have I just called it projectile? I have. So if the projectile is not equal to null, we will then do projectile.init. And then we can pass through some form of damage value. So at the moment we have this, we have a speed here. Let's go and take our projectile damage. I've lost it. Here it is. Take our projectile damage out of here. And we will pop that into here. And then we'll fix some of these other bits in a little load here. So damage, yep. I need to come down here and I need to pass in underscore projectile damage. So now, instead of it using this value that we hadn't seen before, we're going to see that on the weapon that's on our character, and we should see a slightly different change in health. So for the sake of making this alarmingly obvious, let's make sure this is all safe.
400 damage.
I'm going to think we're going to set a very high damage on here. So 100 health will one-hit both of these enemies. So if we do a cheeky little run here. So there's our one hit on that guy and one hit on that guy, right? So we can see how that damage is being passed through. Now let's make this a modifier, right? So maybe we had some pickups or something like this that we could pick up. It would increase our damage for a short period of time. So instead of this being projectile damage, let's say that our weapon has a projectile damage modifier. Okay, we'll make that a float because this is going to be like 1.5 or something like that.
We could do it 4 times.
Quad damage. Excellent.
Look it up.
So then in our projectile, this is no longer going to be an integer. This is going to be a floating point. And we need to deal with this accordingly. So we're no longer setting this just equal to damage. What we want to do is take our existing damage. I want to treat that as a float.
And then do some math.
And then do some maths. So we could do times by, and this is going to be damage multiplier. Something like that. Now this is going to be angry at me because this here is a floating point value because we're timesing something that is an int that we're treating as a float by another float. So we'll take that and we'll turn that back into an integer.
Can we
floor it? We probably can floor it. Let's see. If I can remember the function, it's probably something like mathf dot floor to int. There we go.
No.
Not bad for a quick little guess.
There you go.
So we'll pass our floating point in there and we'll do that. So we've got 10 damage. So let's say that we multiply this by
1.5. That's an easy one.
That should be in there.
Yeah.
Little. There we go. Why is this getting mad at me? What have I done wrong? Oh, it's modifier, not multiplier. Terrible. Modifier. There we go. So what should we do? Times it by
1.5.
1.5?
You could times by 4 if you want. That'll do quad damage.
You like some quad damage.
I do like quad damage.
So let's put a 4 in there.
Oh.
So this guy, I know because I made this. This guy has 50 health. So he should be sort of 2 hits. Let's go for 6. Boom. So this guy we should 1 hit because 6 times 10, 60.
12. Yeah, makes 6, yeah.
And this guy should still take 2. So we can just check that our values are all working as we expect them to. So loop, right, there we go.
Oh, he died.
1 hit for that guy, 2 hits for that guy. Excellent, perfect. So we can see this is being used. We can now set this to something like 1.5. So we can see then how our weapon is able to modify the projectile that it's firing, but our projectile knows what damage it is doing and sort of how much damage kind of it has. And we're seeing how slowly we're encapsulating bits of this data into smaller and smaller chunks. So over time, this becomes more and more manageable for us and sort of easier for us to cope with. So as Mike suggested, let's see if we can add another projectile. So I'm going to go for the wonderful original name of player projectile 2.
Okay, yeah, acceptable.
Right, so I'm just going to copy and paste that. Oh, 1, apparently. Player projectile 1. So let's see what we can do about a sprite here.
Do you have a sprite of a fish?
I don't have a fish sprite, I'm afraid. We might have to just go for something simple. So if I take off the animator here, our projectile will no longer spin, which is a bit of a shame. But it'll show a bit of a difference between them. Maybe I can just make this sort of a nice little... what sprites do I have in here, actually?
Can you fire a character?
I could. No, I can't fire a character. We can fire some of these enemies, though. Do I have any of these set up as individual sprites? Yeah, let's fire this mushroom.
Sounds fine.
Why not? So let's see if we can go back and quickly find that. So in our projectiles, player projectile 1, we do here and we search for, what was it, enemy 0. Yeah, one of these mushrooms will do. Let's go for this one.
There we go. Fire mushroom.
Lovely. So we've got a projectile. I don't know what this is going to look like anymore.
Probably horrendous.
Probably pretty bad.
That's good. It's fine.
So then what we could do, we could maybe have a way to sort of swap these out or something like this. I'm not going to set up the inputs to do it. We're just going to do it manually. So now then, if we go to our projectile down here, let's say that our mushroom guy, he does lots of damage, I think.
I was going to say 1 damage, but
then 1 damage.
Fire rate to something absolutely horrendous.
Sure, we can do that. So damage of 1. Now the fire rate is based on how quickly I can click.
Oh,
but that's okay.
Spam click it.
I can spam click it. So we can pass in our player projectile 1 here. I haven't had to change anything. Our projectile speed,
it really slow.
5. We could make it really slow. 5. Damage modifier. Do we want to do a modifier here?
1 is fine. Put 1 in.
Put 1. But then we're going to make this do very little damage.
That's perfectly fine. I know we just need to change the clip size to 8,000. Okay.
I'm going to go for 1,000 and our fire rate of 0. Okay, so let's see how quickly I can click. I guess.
Clicks per minute.
I don't know. I've never tested.
Have you not? There is a website.
No. Okay, here we go. I'm going to use 2 fingers. Look at that.
See, this is pro gaming right now.
Now, they do have a little sort of stun mechanic on them, so that as the game is just constantly stunned. So maybe this weapon isn't quite to our desires.
If you change the input so it's just on held.
Yeah, that would be a little bit better.
That would be
and maybe if they could take damage while they were stunned.
Oh,
that would be better. No. So you can see the 2 bullets that actually collide are fine, but then every other bullet is just sort of phasing through them because of the stun feature.
Terrible design.
I know. I'm sorry. I've let you down, Mike. But you can see very quickly there how we can now throw more and more weapons at things. We can very quickly tweak values. We have something that we can scale upon quite quickly, both in terms of I haven't had to touch code to make that new projectile, which is always quite nice. So if I, as a programmer, am sort of handing this system off to somebody to kind of make some more projectiles or make some more weapons, they can quickly test that, and we can sort of worry about input and things like this a little bit later. And we're kind of thinking about that concept of ownership. So our weapon has certain values that it can tweak in the projectile, and our player is owning a weapon. It's not owning a projectile. It's not having to do any of that management over the projectile itself. So I think we will probably leave it there for today. So this is the end of this particular episode of Developer Mode. You can watch some more on our YouTube channel here on YouTube. So thank you very much, Mike.
Not a problem.
For joining me in playing around with some Unity, and I hope that you enjoyed looking at some encapsulation.
I do indeed. I feel I know a bit more about OOP, and inherently, so do my kids.
Excellent. Thank you very much, folks.